So let's get uncomfortable. Let's get uncomfortable.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Uncomfortable Leader podcast. I'm Rick Longnecker, your host. In every episode, we explore the uncomfortable leadership moments that executives face at every stage of the business life cycle and at each stage of their career. We discuss how they navigated those moments and the lessons they've learned. Their stories and experience are informative, inspiring, and filled with practical advice. And that's where today's Uncomfortable Leader guest comes in, Dan Dinell. Dan is president of Trees for Honolulu's Future. Prior to that, Dan served as president of Hawaii Coffee Company. He held multiple executive roles at Hilton hotels in Beverly Hills and in Honolulu, and served as executive director of the Hawaii Community Development Authority. Dan and I met just before 9/11 as speakers at a conference board event in New York City. Dan, thanks for making time in your busy schedule to join us on the Uncomfortable Leader podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's great to be here, and especially that you dated me, decades old. So
we're young men. It's just relative to who we hang out with in the room, right?
True. Well, I picked up pickleball. My friend asked me, he's like, Dan, let's go play. And I said, well, pickleball's for old people. And he looked at me and he said, Dan, you are old.
Thanks for reminding me, right? Well, I keep telling my wife that I've got to stop dyeing my hair gray and let it go back to its original blonde state. She's not buying that. So, hey, here's a first question. I think the audience and I want to know is, how are things in Hawaii?
Well, Hawaii is a unique place. I'm born and raised in Honolulu. People are always kind of surprised by that because they're like, oh, you don't seem like you'd be from Hawaii. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I always drill down because I think it really reveals people's biases, like that
Right.
And so born and raised here, things are good. They're not great. Hawaii's economy is really, number one is tourism. Number two is government and military. And way down on third is agriculture and others. And tourism has been a struggle. So it kind of reverberates through the economy. That said, Hawaii is a great place to live. And it's a challenging place in the sense of what also makes it great, which is this real melting pot. It's got just a diverse set of people and needs. And of course, we're 2,500 miles away from the nearest other landmass. So that's, there is this isolation that, comes with its pluses and its minuses.
So, you were born and raised and spent a big chunk of your life there, so it's home. But I think for a lot of us, like you talked about tourism, it's actually a very cool place to visit.
Well, actually, the weather has been changing as just Earth has been changing.
Right.
But it's not as humid as other places in the tropics.
That's true. That's true. Tell us a little bit here about Trees for Honolulu's Future. What is that?
So we're a nonprofit that works to increase the urban tree canopy. So we do that in three ways. We've got advocacy at the government level. We kind of bring groups together because a lot of people are interested in planting trees. We often we support that, and we're really keen on getting the right tree in the right places with the right care. And then the third thing is just general education about the many, many benefits of trees. And I do this as part-time because I want to take care of my young son and family. And also, it really helps me stay anchored into other activities that I enjoy. So, it's been a great way of looking to the future. And I think that's really key. I heard a podcast once with this professor at University of Texas, and she pointed out, don't save Mother Earth. Earth will be fine. The atmosphere will exist. It just won't be hospitable to
Right. It won't be
humans.
life sustaining.
Yes. And I was like,
Small
that's a
problem.
very good point. Mars has an atmosphere.
Right.
It just isn't hospitable to human life, or life as we know it. So
Right.
I like that a lot. It really grounds me in this idea of, if we want to have a place where we want to live, then we need to do certain actions. And trees aren't the only action, believe me.
Right.
Lots of things need to
Right.
happen.
And from your firsthand experience that there's, many, many, many uncomfortable leadership moments that leaders face that are caused by internal changes in our strategy and our operations and our tactics. But there's also external changes going on that we can't control that are caused by, like you just said, the environment, the economy, customer changes, competitors come in and out, technology changes, the government comes in, regulations. So these moments occur, as you know from your experience, at each stage of the business life cycle, and they're just never ending. So with that as a backdrop, what I'd like to do is go back in time in your career, and let's talk through your career of your jobs that you've been in as an executive, as a manager. And let's talk about some of the uncomfortable moments that you faced and in some ways that you dealt with them. What was your first management position where you were managing other people?
So we go back to my days at Hilton Hotels, at the
Okay.
corporate office in Beverly Hills, and I got a promotion, and I had an assistant, and I was feeling really good about myself. That was my first job. But you know what? Especially in a large corporation, you go through trainings and different things, but I don't know if it really prepares you to be a good manager, and understand people. And I would say it was a rocky a rocky start.
I think for most of us in those first jobs, a lot of us were good individual contributors at whatever we did,
Yeah,
engineering or sales or planning or accounting. And the boss puts us in, but we don't have any management background. And
absolutely. So yeah, I think back, and it was in my first week, and had conflict with my assistant because I wanted her there at the office at a certain time, 8 a.m. And she had a commute, and it wasn't possible. And I confronted her on this, and it stressed her out. It stressed me out. And I'd like to say that eventually it ended well, but that first week it was hard. But I didn't really have the empathy. You talk about
right.
the emotional. Yeah, it's just so. Leaders need to be empathetic, and I don't think I had that at the get-go.
When I met you, you were the head of strategic planning for
Yeah.
Hilton. And I have to imagine as a strategic planner in a hospitality business, the size of Hilton, that you had to not only identify the uncomfortable leadership moments in the marketplace, but then try to figure out a way to handle them. So talk about that a little bit. What was that like?
Yeah, it was when you have a big brand, big footprint, and dispersed like hospitality. There's lots of moving parts. So what we struggled at the headquarters was really creating a framework in order to manage the very many different hotels, and that's really what we worked on, initially. And then it became acquisitions, expanding, and you have what you have today with the Marriott and Hiltons. I was just blown away looking at, Hilton probably has 25 brands now.
Underneath it, yeah.
Yeah, underneath it. When we started, it was just Hilton, and then we acquired Promise, which was Hampton Inn and Embassy Suites, and a few others. And then we started that kind of brand portfolio. But back to the strategic planning. So that was a very intentional strategy that we had. But it was also a framework of how to balance the financial, the customer service, and even in the case of hotels, and I think most businesses, and often overlooked, is the community aspects. So it's not just your customers, external customers, internal, and your finances, but it's how do you relate with the community. And we put all of that together in a rubric called the Balanced Scorecard, and that's what we worked on. And
I was gonna say,
I
that's
think
when
we
you
got
and
the
I met back in the
yeah,
glory
yeah,
days of the balanced scorecard in the late 90s.
and it was fun. We got the highest praise when we merged with or took really Promise over and their executives, and you kind of show and tell. Here's what we're doing, and their EVP of operations, he looked and he said, "This is really good." That's all he said, and it's like,
Right.
yes,
Right.
we're on to something
Exactly.
here. And then, of course, it was presentations and ultimately published in the Cornell Quarterly. So that was a great achievement, and I think that's important in leadership is sharing your experiences with others, and if someone else can get some nugget or insights from your experience, I think that only enriches what you're doing. So
Right.
some people want to hold their strategy,
Right.
or so close to the vest. I think that's a big mistake.
That's true. So talk a little bit about that when you started to do the M&A, right? You started acquiring businesses. There's a lot of uncomfortable moments, man, when you're dealing with that. What's your takeaways from that?
Yeah, this great question takes me back. And it sounds painfully obvious, but just be honest. Because people are on pins and needles. I don't care if you're, an executive or a line employee. Like, what's happening here? And it's really important to be honest. People, they have their BS detectors on, and if you start kind of like just spinning a tale, they'll see right through it. And then there's all kinds of consequences from that, not the least of which is you lose trust. And I think it's okay. I mean, I certainly said it a lot to, someone asks you a question, you just say, I don't know. I'll get back to
Yeah.
you. It's pretty simple stuff, but it's hard for people to say, I don't know.
It is that's an uncomfortable moment as a leader when you feel that you need to know the answer, but you don't. And so that's when we as leaders get into trouble. To your point, instead of just saying, I don't know, let me look into it. When we start to dance and mumble along and fumble
Yes.
along, that's when we get ourselves into trouble. And part of that's because we've not been trained. Right.
Yeah.
We've not been trained in how to deal with that uncomfortable moment. And I think as you get, and this is not an age issue, it's really more of an experience issue that, as you've experienced more firefights in the military, you become more accustomed to the noise and the sound of the battle. So you become a little, calmer in those moments.
Absolutely. And I think that, that you bring up the military, and I look at my career. I've worked in private sector. I've worked in nonprofit sector. I've worked in government. I've never directly been involved in the military, but I did get the opportunity to go to the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania for a week on strategy. And I was really impressed because this is the place where all the colonels and lieutenant colonels go on their way to become generals. And I was super impressed that they military really has a lot of critical thinking. I was always like, oh, it's just groupthink, it's just command and control. But the real power of any force is this idea of the planning and the execution, and then what the military does very well. And we actually instituted this at Hilton and other places I worked at, was the after action report. The critical analysis, and Google like red teaming, and there's all kinds of great strategies that come out of the military. And just as an aside, Hawaii, as I mentioned right up front, has a large military presence. I just think they're a great resource, because these military personnel go through a lot of taxpayer training. And then after 20 years, if they haven't moved up, they're pushed out. And
Right.
I just encourage private sector, nonprofit sector, look for these people as they're entering the private sector, because you'll get someone who's well trained. But it also may be uncomfortable on
Yeah,
both sides because of
it
just
is.
the
It is.
whole culture
It is.
that is there. But as far as fundamental training and especially what made me think of this is the after action reports.
Yeah,
Super
it's
important.
true. Those are good lessons learned in M&A is just dealing with not saying things that you don't know the answer to and just telling them you don't know the answer, and then the after action reviews on that. What do we learn? So when we go to do the next M&A, right, we don't repeat those same mistakes. It's interesting that you and I share a common bond because I had the honor of sitting through strategy execution week at the War College in June of 2008. And I had the honor through a friend of mine at West Point, now retired General Bernie Banks, allowed me to come out there. He was in that class of 2008. And for those that don't know about the Army War College, it's a great place where we're training the future generals, the colonels to become generals. And you talk about the best and the brightest. As a business person, I think Dan and I can attest to, their critical thinking is incredible, which many of us in the business community maybe never reach. Is that fair, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if my memory's right, you left strategic planning in Beverly Hills and you landed back in Hawaii and you were running the Hilton, what's it called? The Hawaiian Garden?
The Hilton Hawaiian Village. I was doing the planning and development for a new, at the time, the first and largest planned resort development in Waikiki. So, and it was really just a family reason we wanted to move back to Hawaii. I tried to quit, and instead I got transferred. So, which was great because it's always better to have a job than to not have a job, I think.
Right. Now you go out to an established facility,
Yeah.
part of Hilton, and you're doing what in essence is a startup, an add-on to the facility. What was that like?
Yeah. So it's and add-on is probably the best way to think about it. It was pretty. I don't want to say it's pretty straightforward in the sense of I knew the ground because I started in Hawaii, and so I knew a lot of players. So it's kind of like getting reintroduced, and I was really a single individual contributor. So I moved from the corporate overview with lots of people to an individual contributor where I was coordinating consultants, engineering, construction, so forth, in getting this project done. So it was just a different skill set.
So really more of a project management skill set.
Yeah, exactly. And it worked well. And then I reached kind of the end of we had success in securing the permits and development rights and so forth. And then an opportunity came to join the government, the Hawaii Community Development Authority. So there's kind of a through line here of planning and development. And I really seized on that. My boss at the time at Hilton, he's like, Dan, why do you want to go to the government? You're a guy who needs action, moves fast. And I told him, I said, Peter, I'm going to change that. And he just burst out laughing. Exactly. He had the exact same reaction you did. And so I moved to the government, and I had a hard time moving things.
So when you say to the government, now, what was that? That was the Hawaii, what's it called? The Hawaii?
Hawaii Community Development Authority. So it's a semi-autonomous.
Now, is that an appointee? Is that like in Honolulu, or is that Hawaii statewide appointee by the governor?
It's a Hawaii state, so it's a statewide entity which has development districts.
I got you.
The board has a time it was about a 15-member board appointed by the governor, confirmed by
Gotcha.
the legislature. So it's the board who hires me. But
Right,
of course,
right,
the
right.
governor is very involved in this. And yeah, so it was fun to try something new, and to have these ideas of theory of how things should be, and then move them forward. Uh, but yes, many uncomfortable moments. I think when you get vilified by the state legislature, marginalized by the administration, and you're thinking, how the heck am I ever going to get anything done? But throughout, the board had my back. And I think that's really important when you have a board of directors who are with you, because if you don't have
Right.
that, then you got nothing.
Like, what's the big thing that sticks out in your mind? Like, was the most uncomfortable moment for you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much uncomfortable, but it was really the challenging moment of trying to move a development forward. And to this day, it's about 20 acres of prime real estate in urban Honolulu. And this is now, 20 years ago, and it still hasn't been developed. But
Really?
we put an RFP out. We, went through a very public process, and we selected a developer, and then things went haywire, and it was very uncomfortable and disappointing, because at the end the legislature came in and just like put a kibosh on it, and what I thought was a little reassuring, as much as we ended up in a
Just kind of blew up.
exploded in a cloud of dust, was people were mad at us, but nobody argued about our process. We followed a good process. At the end,
Right.
it just became a political football. And I had one state senator explain it to me. It's like, Dan, we weren't upset with you or the development. We just needed to get at the governor. And I was like, what? Like, why? If this was a good for Hawaii, I had this I'll say might be deemed a weak word. I had this naive belief that we were working for the betterment of the state of Hawaii,
Yeah.
and that we were all going to go together. And that wasn't the case. There were actors who were just working against,
Yeah,
the
it got
governor, because
politics, and that's the part they don't train us on in college, whether it's internal corporate politics or government politics. We're not trained in that. We're trained to be sales and engineers and accountants and doctors and lawyers.
so and just to tie it up, since we
Yeah.
started with my boss at the time with Hilton laughing at me about speed, there's a great quote. You could Google it. The oversight committee at the state senate, the chair at the time, is quoted of, we like what HCDA is doing. They're just moving too fast. That was the quote. I was like, exactly. What is wrong with that? But I learned, you got to bring constituents along.
Got to come with you.
Yeah, and I do have a lot of respect for folks who can be entrepreneurial within government.
I mean, it's magical when you watch them work. It's crazy.
And
I couldn't do it.
Yes, and I tried to do it, and I would say, on balance, did okay. Left the place better than I found it, but I don't think changed the trajectory in a major way.
Yeah, and then once again, it's not bad. You just got to know who you are. Back to the leadership.
Yeah.
If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to be uncomfortable in that decision-making environment, and vice versa. If you are into this, take your time, get it at 99.999% right, and make sure you're appeasing everyone and all that, then you're not going to like the entrepreneurial world, because it's not either side of that dialogue as a leader is not wrong. Right.
And then from my government work, I had lunch with the time senior VP of Hilton Grand Vacations, the timeshare part of Hilton, and he offered me a job, and I thought, this is great, because the timeshare group of Hilton is very entrepreneurial. So, and that's me. So it
So it
was a
fit.
good exit, and then into yet another chapter
Of Hilton.
being a leader with Hilton, a different part, not the hotels group, but the timeshare group. And it included a stint in Tokyo. And that was, you didn't do that in the introduction, but that, was a certainly a challenging assignment for a couple years, where you have the cultural change and so forth. But it was a lot of fun. And
I'm real intrigued by this now because a lot of folks I talk to, they've moved around the world and that. So talk about what are some of your learning lessons looking back on those 2 years?
so one thing is, my boss at the time, he gave me good marching orders. He told me, go to Japan and run an American corporation in Japan. He's like, I don't want to become a Japanese company. And nothing wrong with Japanese management, your classic Toyotas or Sony and so forth. But he really wanted to make sure that we were merit based, that we were, and in the timeshare industry, it's all in the numbers. It's like, marketing funnel. Can we get the right prospects in, sales? And I remember having a conversation with the HR director for Hilton Grand Vacations in Japan, and she just couldn't get over it. Well, this is wrong. That the sales person is making more money than the manager. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with this.
Right.
The salesperson is making sales on commission, and that's our model.
Right.
But here's the trick, Rick, that it is a little counterintuitive, because you always hear like, well, you want to be culturally appropriate. But we wanted to be this American company operating in Japan. We attracted the rebels. We attracted the people who didn't fit in the standard,
In the standard culture.
the standard
Business
Japanese
culture.
model. And kid you not, half the managers were women in Hilton Grand Vacations Japan. That is not the case, in any major Japanese company today. Although I was really pleased to find out that the new CEO of Japan Airlines is a woman, but that is super rare. So we had just motivated people, men, women. I didn't care, Japanese descent, Korean descent, didn't matter to us. We just needed performers. And that really was, it created for some an uncomfortable situation. And frankly, those who couldn't get their heads around that culture just left. And that was
Right.
okay. And
Right.
so,
Well, it's back to they left not because they're bad people or bad
yeah,
workers. They left because it's not a fit to their style and what their beliefs or whatever, right? And that's good. That's healthy because they're in a better place. They can better shot to find a place where they do fit in with their culture and their personality. So that's a win. I've always felt from a management leadership standpoint is our job's not to fire people. Our job is to get people in the right spot. And if we can't get them in the right
absolutely.
spot, we need to help them because they're not bad people. They're good people. They're just in in the wrong spot. And
Yeah,
when you're a young leader, a young manager, you're just pushing that performance. Like you had said earlier in our conversations,
yeah.
and as you get older, and it's not about age older; it's about experience older. You realize, no, these are good human beings.
Yeah.
We've got to get them into a spot that fits better with them. So the Tokyo thing's a very cool experience. I mean, there's got to be just chock full of experience and lessons learned there. What did you do after that? So
Transferred back to Hawaii, and with Hilton Grand Vacations, worked in marketing and sales locally. And then the company went through a reorg, and basically I was laid off, and that was difficult. It wasn't, fortunately, because I don't have an extravagant lifestyle, it wasn't like a financial, calamity, and the company was quite fair in severance and so forth. But you really question, like, okay, well, what should I do, and where should I go, and so forth. And from that, I transitioned to Hawaii Coffee Company, which is you really have to scratch your head and say, like, what kind of experience do you have in, CPC, consumer products, and I give the owners credit because they saw in me not an expert in coffee, not an expert in packaged goods, but an expert in leadership, an expert in turnaround situations, in creating culture and alignment. And that's what I did in Japan for Hilton Grand Vacations. Kind of got them de-Japanesized and back into kind of the American, and timeshare model. And that's what I did at Hawaii Coffee Company. Came in, and really it was a challenge, but during the interview process, and they flew me out to Los Angeles where the ownership is based, and they asked me, what's your plan? And it's a good interview. I said, well, the first thing I'll do is do every job. I cycled through, I came at the 5 a.m. shift and worked the assembly line. People
Right.
couldn't, and I still remember the coffee processing on Hawaii Island. The manager there said, Dan, we've never had anyone come here and spend more than an hour with us. It's like,
Right.
I'm here for the next day and a half. I want to learn how coffee is processed. I
Right.
want to do the work.
Right.
And
But that's a good lesson learned for leaders that are in the audience, is that, what Dan just said is a big takeaway. Whether you're in your current company or you go to a new company and you're a leader, the higher up you go in leadership, the more you've got to get on the ground. And it's not for 5 minutes to do a PR stunt with cameras and video cameras. Like Dan just said, you got to sit in the plant at 1 o'clock in the morning. You got to go in and work with the frontline workers, sit in a lounge chair and just sit back in a corner, watch them work for 3 or 4 hours, and you'll begin to see the problems they have. And it's education. I mean, Dan, it sounds like what you did.
Yeah. A great way to summarize it. Yeah. And I went, with the service tech to the McDonald's, the company who supplies the coffee to McDonald's in Hawaii. How do we fix the machines? And just learning. And what it did, besides introduce me to a lot of people in the company, it allowed me to understand, and it showed them that I was a leader who was comfortable saying, I didn't know. I don't know how you roast and pack coffee, but I learned. And that
and I'm
makes
willing to
you
listen. I'm willing to learn. For those in the audience that are from my hometown of Toledo, Ohio, I was doing some research a number of years ago on some businesses in Toledo, and I stumbled across a coffee brand, and I Googled it, and I found out that it was a brand owned by the company that Dan was at, Hawaiian Coffee. So, Dan, do you remember that?
Yeah, Lion Coffee. I think it was 18.
What was the name of it again? I can't remember.
Lion, Lion.
Lion Coffee was in Toledo, Ohio, was packaged in the 20s and 30s or something like that?
No, 1800s.
1800s.
Yeah, I'm thinking it was post-Civil War, so, 18,
wow.
Yeah, so and there's great backstory. I forgot that it was Toledo, Ohio, but you are absolutely correct. You did great research. So Lion Coffee established Civil War, post-Civil War, and it was actually one of the largest coffee companies in America. I think there were 2 at the time, and then basically went bankrupt, defunct around the Great Depression. And then a guy in Hawaii by the name of Jim Delano liked antiques, collecting, so forth, and he bought some memorabilia, and he really liked this Lion Coffee can and look and so forth. And he did some research, and he bought the trademarks, the rights. And so this was probably 1970s.
Really?
So he bought the rights. So it was pretty dormant for about 50 years there. He bought the rights and built it up in Hawaii, this Toledo to Honolulu connection.
Well, I mean, obviously Toledo, Ohio, and the northern part of the United States near the Canadian border has a lot in common. with Honolulu and Hawaii.
I think Lion Coffee may be the only thing in common.
Well, people here, when you say in Toledo, when you say Lion Coffee, a lot of folks remember an old store here, retail store called the Lion Store.
Mm.
And so some would immediately jump and go, oh, that must have been the coffee they sold at Lion Store. But no, you're telling me it was 1800.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it is totally there. And
How funny, huh?
yeah, this entrepreneur, built it into a brand and then ultimately sold it to a family company out of Los Angeles, and they accumulated with another brand and built it into Hawaii Coffee Company, one of the largest. Well, certainly in Hawaii, the largest coffee producer in the state.
That's pretty cool.
And then, exporting to Asia, exporting to the U.S. mainland.
Right.
And when I was at Hawaii Coffee Company, one of the things that we did, which was fraught, was update the logo and really
Modernize.
modernized it. And it was a very challenging process. And at one point, the chair of the board, he's like, oh, Dan, I don't know. And I said, John, it is too late. We're printing the new film is what the bags are called. I said, if it doesn't work, you can fire me.
Right.
And that's how, at some point you just, we went through the focus groups to get data, and the designers did a wonderful job. And in fact, after this, I'll email you some before and afters, and maybe you can cut it into
Hey, we'll
this
put them up in the post so people can
presentation,
see
and you
them
can
on
see
social
this
media.
evolution of the brand. So I think that my big takeaway, you did a good job with the summary in Japan, is uncomfortable leader. You have to take some risks, and you cannot sit on your laurels. So we're the biggest coffee brand in Hawaii. We're doing fine. We could do better. And one way we did was modernize the logo, not just do it because we wanted a new look, but do it because we wanted. And today it's even better.
Right.
But
Right.
you have to get in that uncomfortable position where I told the boss, if it doesn't work out, you can fire me.
Yeah, and that's a great lesson right there. Is the uncomfortableness is it's so well said. We're on top of our game, but we have to be uncomfortable, because if we're uncomfortable, we're open-minded, and we're open-minded, we see opportunities in the market and we seek out to be better. You're just chock full of lessons learned here. We could go on for 4 hours on that. There's just 1,000 uncomfortable leadership moments and lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we'll have to do is, schedule a time in the future to come on and do another episode together and continue on some of these other lessons learned, because there's a lot of them there.
Absolutely. I would love that. Or as you're talking, I think it'd be really fun if you got a little panel of some of your guests together. We had some kind of maybe an in-person get together at some point. That would be great.
It's interesting. One of my guests last week said to me that after the podcast, they said, Rick, we need to have an Uncomfortable Leaders Summit.
Yeah.
Where we all come together from around the world and talk about these things, because there's a lot to talk about, and you're not going to do it in 30 or 40 minutes. Right. So suffice it to say, today, what you and I were able to do is tee up some things. The audience got to learn about your experience a little bit and realize that when they look at their day job, it's a lot like your day job, even though, everybody always thinks the other guy's got a cool job or the woman's got a great job, right? They always think that, and they realize now there's no great job. That's why they call it work. So Dan, listen, I'm grateful for the time. I'm grateful for your friendship, and I'm grateful for the time that you spent today. So thank you.
My pleasure. Appreciate it, and look forward to continuing conversations.
It'll be fun. So that's it for this episode of the Uncomfortable Leader podcast. Now it's time to take control and calmly manage the cycle of uncomfortable leadership moments. So let's get uncomfortable. Are you ready to take control and calmly manage the cycle of uncomfortable leadership moments? Then let's schedule an assessment or a keynote speech at your next meeting or conference, a training workshop, or a coaching session. Go to uncomfortableleader.com and click on the link. It's time to take control of the uncomfortable leadership moments facing your company and department. Now let's get uncomfortable.